Happy Monday.
Happy Monday and happy end of summer.
Yes, yes. It's what is there anything specific we can say about the end of summer and data? Ghalib, you were saying that it feels like all the business pressure is kind of flowing in now that people are getting back from vacation. Are there
I
any
mean, this
big
is,
themes?
I will say, I mean, this is America. Ultimately, the business pressure never really goes away. There is something that happens in the last week of August, though. I think there's a last gasp of vacation that takes place in the last week
Yeah.
of August, with Labor Day, take the kids, the schools are about to kick in. And so there is a mild lull in the last week of August. And then come September, sort of everyone is back generating dashboards, generating
Back to
analysis.
business.
They're looking at pipelines. The bosses are yelling, give me this and give me that and give me this other thing. Thanksgiving's in the air. Before we started recording, Matt mentioned the weather turning ever so slightly. And it's just this hint that Thanksgiving is coming up, so get your work done. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I was out trail running this morning, and it was awesome. It's cold, it's crisp.
Oh, is Utah cold and crisp now?
Oh yeah, the leaves are already changing up in the mountains where I was,
Oh,
and
wow. Yeah.
it's awesome. I mean, not like full on fall yet, but it's cool to see that. No pun intended. Um, yeah, it's funny. I was actually responding to somebody on LinkedIn yesterday because they had a graph of Google Trends for ChatGPT, and this is for the United States. And they're like, well, it seems to follow school and probably when Americans take breaks. And it's like Americans don't take breaks for the summer.
This is
This
correct.
is an absolute lie. The Europe does for sure, but I think it was a European who said that. It's like,
Yeah. I'm from the Middle East. We take breaks all the time, even summer, not summer. But no, I think Americans will. A few individuals will disappear once in a while, but
no, we die at our desks like a lot. It happens.
the American will say, "I'm on vacation, but I'm reachable through email, through phone, through fax, and through carrier pigeon
Yeah.
anytime."
No, but I was talking to a friend in Finland, and they take like 4 weeks off in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
summer, in addition to everything else.
yep,
Like,
yep, for sure. They just shut down.
different,
It's just how
different
it's.
world.
Yeah,
Did you
yeah.
have a good summer?
Yeah, I mean, just busy again. The American economic engine never stops humming, right? And so it was good summer, sure, but just like any other season, really. Certainly, attending the conferences was somewhat interesting. Showed up to Databricks and Snowflake Summit.
Oh yeah, I saw you at a Snowflake for a bit.
Yep. Yeah. Saw you at Snowflake. Matt, were you at Snowflake and or
I was
Databricks?
not at Snowflake. I made it to Databricks, but yeah, I didn't make it to
Oh,
Snowflake.
well, I
Yeah.
can ask the both of you then, I guess, to cover each one. Anything interesting spotted
I
that's memorable?
the kind of funny thing is, I think in data we're fond of saying the more things change, the more things stay the same. It's very much
Yeah.
a cliche, but this year, um, instead of, I mean, obviously people were still talking about Gen AI because everyone's talking about that, but the big news was the tabular acquisition, right? So it's like very classic, like, data format schema, like kind of tabular is both new and old at the same time. It's fundamentally like a new way of managing schemas, which is a very, very old theme in data that goes back to the 70s or 60s or something.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I felt like at Snowflake it was interesting because Sridhar's Sridhar Rathaswamy, the CEO, was his first time on stage, so I caught the keynote there, and it was definitely an interesting kind of changing of the guard versus Frank Slootman, who's just this hard charging, like kind of general patent kind of guy. Just, I'm so surprised Frank Slootman doesn't like chew on a cigar
Mm.
when he's talking.
Yep. Yep.
So, but Sridhar's almost the exact opposite. Like,
More
very
cerebral,
gentle,
maybe.
thoughtful, but also like hard work. You can tell the guy's cerebral and definitely like also just hard charging. I've heard he's a complete workaholic, but
Mhm.
so I think that was interesting to see sort of the changing of the guard there, and I think sort of the changing of the company in a lot of ways. It's moving from data warehousing to I guess what they used to call a cloud data platform to now an AI and cloud platform. Um, so it was interesting catching the keynote, and then the next day or two, or was it when Tabular was announced that Databricks? So I think that caught everybody off guard for
Mhm.
sure. So like, huh, okay, interesting. Because I know that Snowflake was hyping up Polaris as
Yep.
sort of the bridge into. So and they must have known that something was coming because I'm guessing they were probably part of that acquisition talks, and that didn't. I'm guessing it didn't
Yep.
work. I'm speculating, but if I'm if I'm a reasonable businessman, which I like to think that I am sometimes, I would guess that they were part of the negotiation
Yeah.
and didn't get it. So, this is a preemptive thing. So, yeah, it's interesting seeing the machinations. And then I didn't make it to Databricks. I think travel, and I think my kid actually had something going on, so I was like, I'd rather hang out with my kid than go to
Oh,
Starbucks. So Matt went. Who's
yeah. Did you, at least Joe, a question for you here. Is there anything memorable as far as announcements from Snowflake?
I
I mean,
think
there are a
the
few
thing
sort of nods towards AI, but at least for me, I don't really remember anything big I could sort of latch onto.
they said it was going to be the year of GA, so this means like unlike other Snowflake events in the past, where it seems
Mm,
like half of the announcements were just vaporware that I'm
yep,
still waiting to see. This was supposed to be the year where they really push things to production quickly and people are able to use them in production. So
mm,
we'll see. I mean, so that's what I'm really waiting for, is to see what.
yep,
And I think it's more of what they didn't say, and I think that's more of what I was curious about. Like, I think there was a lot of cool stuff, like the AI dashboards,
mm,
but that seems to be table stakes now. But when that was announced actually during the keynote, I definitely was sitting next to some people who worked at a popular BI tooling company, and they sort of had this like, oh crap look on their face, and I think they were texting their peers about the oh crap moment they felt.
hmm.
So I thought that was interesting, but
Yeah, there was that, and there
yeah,
was at least now they've been pushing it a bit. The goodness me, English prompting to SQL also, right? There's a bunch of startups working on that stuff, natural
yeah.
language to SQL translation, and maybe, I don't know, maybe jury's just still out on whether anyone actually uses this thing in a trustworthy fashion.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
trustworthy, I think, is the key word here. I think increasingly we're still excited about these tools, but it's about the risks now, right? It's like, if I'm going to deploy this in an enterprise environment, what are the risks that come with that?
Yeah.
Because all of us have seen cases where even screwing up a SQL query from a human causes bad numbers to be sent
Yep.
to the business. They make bad decisions. It's like, oh no, our numbers are completely off when they do the books at
Yep.
the end of the quarter. This could be so much worse.
Yeah. The thing is, yeah, when you think about, well, maybe there's a 5% error rate at the best of times, maybe typically 10%, maybe 10 to 15% sort of howler responses. If I'm if given those numbers for a spam filter, I'd probably be okay because it's just me, right? Well, I'd rather take that than nothing and deal with my own inbox's extra 10 to 15% of spam. But error with this stuff means there's a company-wide issue, which adds a lot more sensitivity to it. And well, I have nothing to say except to echo your comments and caution, really, on this one. I'm just not quite sure what the plan is. And there may not be. It may just be a sort of, well, fingers crossed that we drive the error rate down to zero.
Well, I think an important thing to point out here is that the reason we hire analysts is not just to build dashboards, but to debug them, right? We
Mm,
assume that a good analyst can do basic statistics, can respond to business needs, but also
mm,
can iterate on dashboards and say, does this look correct? And how do I cross-check myself with other queries to make sure the data is consistent, that it represents what the business thinks it
mm.
does? Can we get to the point where, these models can do something similar? What
I
do
wouldn't
you
say
think,
it's the
Bob?
only work of an analyst, though. I think that I mean, I remember working when I worked as an analyst. I think dashboards were something that were we tried to automate those as quickly as possible, and how you get people to use them as well as interact with you is really just get embedded in the business and help them solve problems.
Mm,
You're the sort of the data end of things, and they're the domain experts. And so over time, you actually become somewhat of a domain expert yourself, and I think
yep.
that's when it becomes, I think, a very nice harmonious relationship with quote the business, is when you're able to provide your skills, as an analyst, but really help move the needle forward. Because at that point, it's not about data; it's just about your part of the business function. You bring a
Mm,
certain skill set and perspective to the table, and it works. I've seen it work. I've been a part of it, and you know um, I think that's when it truly works. And hopefully that these text to SQL tools, you know, hopefully it enables people to answer or ask better questions of the business and gets people involved in it. And I think that's the goal of a lot of these startups is,
mm.
maybe dashboards, maybe there's dashboard blindness, and maybe if people have a way of interacting with the data more, perhaps,
Oh, yeah.
then they have, maybe they can answer more questions and they start working with you, the analyst, better
Yep.
to sort of have a dialogue. So you're sort of the human, complement to what a chatbot couldn't
Yeah.
do, which is the domain. But it remains to be seen. I mean, the counter example of that is how many dashboards answer pretty simple questions that people ask and people don't use them. Dashboard. usage notoriously drops off a cliff, and so
Mm.
part of it's an organizational and people problem, as everything is. But yeah,
I guess
um,
you've raised a question that hasn't really been answered out there, which is who's the audience here? Is it really people who aren't analysts, or is it people who are analysts and making their job easier? And I think it's an important question for whoever's making these products to answer. Right? Is it a conversation starter, that you're generating SQL, or are you doing your core job here? And the conversation starter bit is definitely an optimistic, I think, entry point into these products. And then I think as data people, we look at the other possibility and get the heebie-jeebies. Whoa, hang on, I can't deal with error rates, right? Yeah, I haven't seen anyone actually put a question.
But Matt, we've been tossing around an idea actually since I met you. About how the world isn't about a single answer, and how it typically revolves around probabilities of outcomes. And do you want to expand on that a bit? Because I think this is important to the conversation.
Yeah.
Because error rate's an
Excuse
interesting
me.
thing. Let me just copy this. Error rate's an interesting
Yeah.
thing, and it's kind of like error rate against what expectations?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exactly. And I mean, so I actually had a math professor who talked about this way before the big financial crisis in 2008. And he basically forecasted the whole thing and said, right now these financial firms get a single number that's like their 99% risk. And there are several problems with that. So first of all, that 99% risk is maybe more like a 75% risk. In other words, there's another 25% where things can go really, really wrong. And the models have kind of been massaged a bit to hide some of those details. And also they're using underlying models that maybe aren't great for modeling this type of risk. And I think in general, I would like to see businesses do a lot more worst case scenario modeling. And when we looked at COVID, we saw that they really weren't doing that, right? Like everyone made assumptions that the future was just going to keep looking like the present. Even as COVID was looming larger and larger as potential threat, I don't think businesses, for the most part, really prepared for it and said, okay, what are we going to do if we have lockdowns? What are we going to do if there are quarantines? And then post-COVID, we saw the same thing where businesses that benefited from COVID didn't really model what was going to happen if people cut back on their streaming subscriptions, for example. And then as soon as they did, it was a big crisis. Instead of kind of saying, okay, we think maybe people will continue watching a lot of Netflix because they've gotten in the habit, but maybe they won't. And maybe we need to model that as well. And in general, I would love to see more scenario-based modeling in numbers, not just a single expectation value, but saying, okay, in this scenario, we expect this, but in this scenario, suppose that our numbers actually rebound back for streaming services, for example, and maybe there's even a bit of whiplash where we see a cutback in subscriptions that's lower than what we had pre-COVID because people are just bored with streaming for a while. What does that number look like? And are we going to have to lay people off, or what are our quarterlies going to look like if that happens? I don't know. What do you think, Joe? I just, in general, I think, I mean, my background originally is in physics before I even did math, before I did data. And in physics, we love to talk about expectation values, which is the average outcome. But it's another detail that hides these scenarios that really, as humans, we need to think about because we think in terms of stories. And so it's good to think about like reasonably probable stories. Like, could we have lockdowns? Could we have a whiplash effect after COVID? All kinds of things like this. What were you going to say, Joe?
Well, expected value is interesting, right? So for the audience, it's something times the probability of it occurring. It's an average, and I think that it works in some cases. It always boggles my mind why there's expected values in things like sales forecasting, for example. So, like a 30% chance of the opportunity happening, right? Let's say it's $10,000 deal, right? $3,000 is going to come in. No, either like 10,000 or some number like that, or zero. It's not the 3,000 that you thought. So I think that's where I think it breaks down. Because I mean, when because a lot of people will use that for their forecast, like, well, that's the expected value for this. Like, no, it's very much a step function. You either get the deal or you don't. There's not like you don't get partial credit in this case. And so I think that whereas so my background originally is going to be an actuary, right? So expected value is literally a premium amount that you pay for your insurance, right? So that's so in that case, it's so given various factors, I'll say, well, that's what I would charge you
Mm.
for that, right? But expected value is an interesting thing. So I think that you need to know like where it makes sense and where it doesn't. But in things like sales, for example, it's like your error rate, for example, is either you get the deal or you don't. There's, like I
Mm.
said, there's not really like a partial thing where the customer just might pay you some money
Mm.
because so it's like I think you just need to know where these things apply.
On the other hand, well, expected value is classic application is gambling, right? What is,
Yeah.
lay down,
Hmm.
like, I'm not a gambler, but if I was, this would certainly make
I
sense.
think that's where it came from, actually.
Pardon?
I think that's where it came from.
Yeah, yep.
Yep.
And so if you apply that lens to sales, right, you could maybe have an expected value threshold on how much effort you put into the deal, right?
Hmm.
How much are we going to bet and, back the sales rep with some resource
Yeah.
based on some expected value
I
cutoff.
think that answers a different question, right? Like, what's given effort, like what might
Mm.
we be expect to close? But that's not the same, I would say, as because when people present me the sales forecast, like this is what we expect to
Yeah,
get. I'm like,
yeah.
well, okay,
Yeah, no one's going to
but
die.
the contract amount is always like X amount. Like you're not going to go under. So anyway, that's a bit of a
Yep.
nuance I had to call people out on because what they would do is I noticed that salespeople try and use this to actually pad their forecast down to sandbag it.
Of course, yeah, of course.
It's like I thought I might hit my number. I don't know, and all the probabilities are like super low.
Yep,
And
classic
they
one.
crush it out of the park and they get their bonus. And they do silly games like pull, maybe push out deals that
Yeah,
can have
yeah.
more in the pipeline for next quarter. And
Seen
so
this.
it's
Yep. This happens
but
all the way to
anyway,
the top. Yeah.
yeah. But that messes with the certainty questions that or that gets the error rate stuff because it's like how do you. So when you're doing like forecasting, for example, right, you'd always have a confidence interval of what
Mm.
like 95% or 97.5 or whatever. 99 should be insane. But there's some degree of variation to Matt's point. It's like
Mm.
there's upper and lower bounds under normal conditions, right? Then you have things like COVID that hit, and then your forecast go completely out the
Yep.
window because it's like the bounds in your error were under different assumptions, and so.
Yep. No, it makes sense. On startup plans, certainly, people misforecast in the sense that when the era of free money kicked off after COVID, everyone just kept spending like drunken sailors, assuming this is just how it's going to go. And there was, forecasting ills there too. Going back to the Databricks and Tabula.
Yeah, we got a bit off track here.
Oh yeah. Well, there's so much to cover, right? I mean, in the world in general. But on Tabula, I do have a curiosity on this one. It's a big acquisition, of course. I haven't really seen too much from our side, which may be a limited perspective, on a huge embrace of storing warehouse data in these alternative formats. I know that at least some of our enterprise Databricks customers are beginning to investigate this, but I haven't really seen it sort of catch on like wildfire. Oh, you know what? We're not going to be storing in native Snowflake format. We're going to move wholesale to Polaris and Iceberg and so on. Have you guys seen a huge adoption of, say, Iceberg, for example? There's a lot of talk and chit chat on Twitter and LinkedIn on Iceberg this, Iceberg that.
My observation on this is that I think anyone you talk to thinks it's a good idea. They all
Yeah.
like the idea of multimodal data. In other words, you have data stored in S3 and then many interfaces to it. But in practice, we struggle with just the basics of ETL and schema management inside Snowflake itself, right? So as soon as they hit that complexity wall, unless they have a really compelling reason, I don't know, things don't necessarily happen fast in that shift just because the complexity is involved, even though Iceberg makes it easier than not having Iceberg.
I agree. Like, I think that it's a noble notion, and I'm a huge supporter of open table formats. It features, actually, there's a whole part of the course that covers this because I think it's the way things are going to be going. But that doesn't mean that, as Matt points out, the friction of I think if you look at everyone's day-to-day work, everyone being people who work in the 95% of companies out there with data stacks, like they're just trying to keep the lights on. I don't think anyone's trying to do anything fancy with anything new. And something new, although it might add some benefits, it's one more thing that people have to implement, learn, maintain. Cognitive overload of like, okay, so do I put this in, a Delta or Snowflake, or do I put it in Iceberg, or do I put it in,
Hoodie or whatever. Yeah.
Hootie? Do I just have a bunch of CSV files that I query because I'm crazy? I don't know. I mean, it's like, but but that's just it. So I think it's more about like who's gonna, if you're gonna make this decision, who's gonna do it, right? Who's gonna support it? Who's gonna catch flack if this thing fails?
Mm-hmm.
Especially right now with data teams, I think under fire for a lot of stuff. Like, do you think, Gal, would you take, if you were a data engineer, would you take the risk of introducing something new into your data
Absolutely
stack?
not. I would be rather interested at a conference, right, from a bit of an academic theoretical perspective. Oh, this seems cool. But no, I mean, if everything's working okay, I think this applies to data people and other people. People tend to just preserve what's working okay. But I do wonder about the new generation then of people coming into the system, right? Why would they adopt this? Maybe it's a question of the tooling still needs to improve.
Well, we had a recent client where we introduced the idea of Iceberg to them, and they were a startup. And I think that because they were new in their data stack, they're like, yeah, that sounds great. They give us a lot of optionality that we wouldn't otherwise have. And so with that was cool to see. I think they were very, I mean, I think it took us about 2 minutes to explain it, and they immediately understood that. I mean, it was awesome to see. And so, see if they get
What
there.
happens to query speed? Is that just taken care of? We haven't actually run huge benchmarks on our side.
That's a very good question. I mean,
there has to be some impact. I've never seen anyone actually quantify. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? And I've never seen anyone go, well, if you go with Iceberg, here's what you lose.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that Iceberg isn't really super opinionated about a lot of the underlying details.
Yeah, they leave that
broad
up to
specification.
query engine. You make your query
Yeah.
engine, make it work, and so on.
Yeah, but so when Snowflake's initial implementation of Iceberg, my understanding is that basically what they did is just implement their usual data format, the micropartitions inside of Iceberg. And what that meant is that Snowflake would still run very fast. Third-party tools, maybe not so much. And at least initially, it was read-only. So in other words, it kind of undermined the whole premise of Iceberg because only Snowflake was allowed to control that data. And so the practicalities of interop can be tricky. I mean, I think part of the idea that they're pushing with Polaris Catalog is we're really fully embracing this. We are going to be more flexible in the future, but it's still kind of vaporware for now.
Yeah. But I mean, let's revisit the conversation. I think in a year you'll have a better idea from a lot of angles. One, like what happened with Iceberg, and then two, like what's the adoption of these things. I think it's still getting started. Like, Matt and I, we did what was it? The Chill Data Summit with Upsolver. That was cool. No pun intended. But they're definitely leading the way with open table formats, and I'll be actually giving a talk to go record it pretty soon for the open source data conference that's next month, and that's I think put up by the people are on Hoodie, but yeah, no idea. I mean, I look forward to a world though of open formats. I prefer that versus
of course,
most vendor driven stuff. Like I do have a bit of a bend where I have a kind of a distaste for large corporations. So I think if you have an alternative and you don't have lock-in, I would say do that. But easier said than done, right?
Yeah, it's worth, I think, taking a look at some history before we wrap up this topic. It may be worth considering some history in technology of other open formats. The classic one being, well, HTML and CSS, right? I think we're all old enough to remember the browser wars.
I was going to bring that up. Talk about the browser wars for sure.
Yeah, right. And so, everyone initially had their own, back in the day, it was really Netscape just making things up as they went along, right? And then Microsoft starts up, and now they make a pretty decent browser with IE 3.0, and then 4.0 is the huge hit. It was a lovely browser. But then there's actually options now in the market that are valid, and now the developers are going, well, we hate this, right? Can someone please sort something out? Standards that are developing. But what do we have today, right? We've got Chrome has come along, and Firefox maybe dying, dare I say, but still exists with users. You've got Safari and mobile Safari as well from Apple, which are huge out in the market. And every browser has some proprietary set of extensions. The proprietary stuff hasn't gone away. And I do wonder with this stuff, if I'm a vendor and I go, well, I could squeeze out better performance if I can make some modifications here. And then what ends up happening is, well, I'll produce a bridge to ingest ingest or really transform the common formats, Iceberg and whatnot, into my own. That'll be the bridge rather than me directly operating on the data. Then I get to influence my own proprietary optimizations and give my customers even a better experience. I wonder if that's where we end up. It becomes an interchange format, if you will, rather than a truly native one.
I mean, that would be helpful to achieve things like data mesh, for example. I mean, the issue right now is there's zero interoperability between. I mean, it was OpenTable or Xtable. I think he's trying to solve this with the OpenTable formats. That's like one aspect of it. I know that Jamaxi's basically working on, well, in a rough sense, sort of the equivalent of Docker for data. So we'll see what that does. But I mean, I was thinking about it last night and think the evolutions like this need to occur. I mean, we're talking over a web browser right now, right? And I mean, HTML5 is a standard. So, but there's a whole institute that was set up with W3C back in the day to house a lot of these standards too, right? Where I don't see the same thing in data nearly as much. So we'll see. But I mean, WebKit's a good example, right? Too, of a technology that sort of like went out. Apple put that out.
So Safari is based on WebKit, and then Chrome sits downstream and also uses WebKit. So like the WebKit engine is very, very dominant in current browser technology. In fact, I think Microsoft adopted WebKit as well, right? Like, kind of a bit of irony there. Microsoft.
Yeah. And then, then you see stuff like, and then the kind of spillover effects is Chrome was powered, it used to be called, maybe it still is, through V8, and that spawned off to Node JS, which like powers most web applications right now. So it's all the second order effects are interesting to see. So it's a good point, Ghalib. Yeah, I mean, the browser works definitely a good analogy.
I think there's always, I think it's worth taking stock of analogies. There aren't really, there tend to be historical analogies, right, with every new development. And at least for me, I jump to the browser wars. And so maybe what ends up happening is we see a bunch of innovation at the storage layer because of these open formats where everyone collaborates on really the core commonality. But we never really escape the bit of proprietary worlds to some extent, just because, again, people can always squeeze out more performance. I think this is a rule. You can always squeeze out more performance if you do your own thing rather than adhere to a committee.
Yeah, there's the customer friendly reason to go proprietary, which is performance. I think that's fair. And cost is really in the spotlight right now. And then there's the customer unfriendly reason, and that's what Microsoft was accused of with like IE 5, 6, that they were basically encouraging developers to target their browser, and that they had a lot of custom features, and that it was very hard. Other browsers really couldn't play nice with their version of HTML.
Yeah, I guess right. It's so early. It's so raw right now with the open data format.
I think this sort of inadvertently answers this question here, which is what reads what can write to what can catalog what. I mean, as I said, it seems to be being worked on right now.
CSV plus cheap compute plus Arrow just good enough. One can claim this is really what these formats are really doing. It's sort of this, yes, except you show up with your own query engine as cheap compute.
I have a very... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Matt.
I have a love-hate relationship with CSV. I think we all do, right?
Yeah. So, yes, I think the answer is CSV. Literally, CSV itself is certainly not enough. It's not Oladimeji. It's not a rich enough type system in there. Right? You lose that one, and that's a pretty big thing to lose in the world of data.
Whereas Parquet has a good type system, but isn't super opinionated, and you actually want an overlay like Iceberg with Parquet to make it easier to manage, but it doesn't have all the headaches that you associate with CSV, like dealing with embedded quotes and such. I'm sure we've all seen that.
Yeah, it's not a well specified data format certainly versus the others.
I just put a link to Xtable too. I think that is what's going to allow you to read and write to what. But that's still incubating right now, so we'll see where it goes. But
okay, well, another question on my mind is on the agenda here related to this. You guys, well, I think all data people have seen, given the marketing dollar spent. We've seen Mother Duck out there, like DuckDB. There's a lot of hype, a lot of enthusiasts talking about DuckDB. One thing I'm not fully clear on, and I wonder if you two have helpful things to say here, is where Mother Duck fits in in the ecosystem, right? So I get DuckDB, great. I've got my local client and just data work on my local machine. But then if my data isn't quite big enough to warrant a full warehouse, I'd go to MotherDuck. Is that the use case?
Well, I mean, if your data does warrant a full warehouse, you could still go to MotherDuck. What I think what the cool thing they're doing is it allows well, there's a way where it triages. Okay, so I get a query. What parts should I execute in the cloud? What parts should I actually like execute
Oh, I see.
on
There's like
your
a hybrid execution situation going on.
right? So what it does is it actually puts DuckDB on the browser using Wasm, and then it
Yep.
can allow you to run queries locally. So I actually see
Oh,
this as a pretty cool technology. Actually, like I
yeah.
was about to mention this in terms of the prior discussion, but in my opinion, I think when Matt and I first heard about this, we were actually interviewing Jordan Tigani on a live show, and I think after that, we're like, if you want any money, like let us know. We'd love to invest. But he's
Mm.
oversubscribed. As
I
like,
think that they've got enough, you know.
yeah, but it was. I mean, part of it's a team they had. I mean, it's you get Jordan and the other
Mm.
people on there. I mean, they're going to build something cool, but it was like. I definitely see that as being a future scenario for how queries are run.
Mm.
Wasm is pretty cool. The first time I saw it was actually it was a Bailey from Single Source. She was showing a demo at my data engineering meetup of a video game scoring system using Wasm in the browser, and it was insane. Like basically, she was able to keep like real time updates like on the wire using Wasm. It's
Yeah.
like holy crap, it was might have been one of the coolest demos I have. It's on the web somewhere. It was good.
Yeah. So the current paradigm, if you will, of querying, putting MotherDuck aside, does not make use of the fact that you've got a node ready to compute. And that's where you're seeing the results, right? Whereas in this world, that makes use of that fact. Well, this is where you're seeing the results. We're going to shove some of the computation there for speed and latency sakes.
And cost too. So cost is the other one. So like, what's the cost of executing this query? Like financial costs.
Yep.
That's another one. So yeah.
No, that does sound quite interesting indeed.
It's cool.
Yep.
So yeah, I heard a talk from Jordan. This was actually, I think, a little over a year ago at Coalesce, DBT Coalesce, and he was basically explaining this architecture that what they envision when the full product is done, I'm sure it will continue evolving, but is that you'll have a local query planner, and when you run a query, the local query planner will say, okay, what's my local compute? What data do I have locally? What parts of the query should go local? What parts of the query should go remote? And then they'll have on their end data warehouse type solution, and then they'll return some data over the wire, and some will be done locally.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I've always wondered, and Matt and I talked about this, and I've said it on the podcast, I'll say it here, but it's like I've often wondered why that whole thing doesn't extend to devices as well. I mean, if you imagine how much power you have, say, on your phone, on other ring, right? You sort of have basically a federated compute.
People are beginning to work on this. There's a few
are.
startups that have kicked off, this, sort of electric SQL and their cousins. This is just the one that comes to mind. I make no recommendations, haven't played with the space, but people are beginning to work on this too. Your edge compute.
If you think of how much like latent compute is just sitting there, like our phones are idle right now.
Yep.
Right. If you could lock a space out where you could do that, that would.
So you truly have a hot cache that's not in a cloud cache, but it's actually on your own device where you're consuming the data right at the end.
Yeah, and then processing it, and it's sort of like it reminds me of what the SETI browser did back in the day. If you want to go back to the old school browser stuff, but what SETI would do is it was a search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and so it was you could download this client where any spare computing cycles were spent helping to parse out signals.
Radio signals, that's in protein folding, remember? Yes.
Protein folding was another one, yeah.
Yep.
So,
all this makes sense then. Quite exciting. Anything else?
It's cool.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
Anything else to say on this topic? Otherwise, I was going to shift.
No. Otherwise, we have a couple audience questions, but I asked one person to refine it a bit, so we can keep switching gears to the original questions.
I don't know if the questions are coming in and if you can see them. Joe, I'm assuming Joe, you're a question master.
Yeah, I'll put one up here.
First
one asks, what's an item you've added or removed from your data stack that's made your life easier, better and easier?
Added or removed from the data stack that's been, well, I can't really think of anything meaningful to say here. I mean, certainly when you have nothing, then adding anything improves one's life. Anything, you know, Matt, I'm reminded of something you said when we started, which is the more things change, the more they stay the same. The themes haven't really changed. I can't quite claim there's something new and novel everyone needs to have that's appeared in the last year or so. Does anything come to your mind?
I mean, to me, the ability to deprecate some of these older systems that are very like on-prem systems that require a lot of management, I've seen that make life easier, but with the caveat that you actually have to migrate to the new systems, and that's
Yep.
what companies really struggle with.
Yep.
Well, I'm curious, like, Amazon announced, how their engineers had used Q, their internal chatbot, to migrate Java 8 to, I can't remember, a more updated language, and that shaved, like, what was it, took 4,500 person years, or saved that much time. So I think I think these migrations are going to get easier.
Yeah, that's not doesn't that fall under data stack though? And the question about data stacks in particular.
I don't know. The data stack. Okay, so what do we add or remove from our data stack to make our life easier? Porting. Yeah, I guess porting your data stack is one angle, which Matt pointed out. Just like shift it, but that's I don't think that's adding or removing. That simply that's just like moving homes. You may add or remove things, like you get a new set of spatulas for your kitchen or something. But go to Spatula City.
Don't have a good one here.
I'm trying to think. I would say, like, what? Well, okay. So things that you would. So what would you add to make your life easier if you needed to? Let's say you're starting from a pretty vanilla modern data stack.
Well, I guess there is a new wave of data observability tools, and I realize this is a bit of an indictment on the industry that observability tools have to exist, but they do, and seems useful to it's some bits of monitoring we didn't really have properly 5 years ago, or at least you'd have to rely on each vendor to do a good job here, the results certainly vary per vendor, which is why this market popped up. But yeah, no, I can't quite claim there's some magic wands out there.
I think the observability would be one I would add. But I think, as you point out with vendors, I think there was a lot of like Potemkin data observability built in, but it was like a shell. It wasn't actually that useful.
Yep. The Potemkin village of vendorism.
I mean, maybe this is where we should talk about like bundling versus unbundling, right? This was a big thing bundling versus unbundling is a very old theme across technology, but it was a big theme in data over the last year and a half. It was all over Twitter. And it was the whole discussion of, is the quote unquote modern data stack too complicated? Do we have too many tools in here? Do we need to consolidate so that people aren't managing 10 different tools to do basic data processing?
Yep. Well, I'm very biased on this one since I bloody founded the company that consolidates. But I think the history of technology is really, I think there's not too much to say except that, yes, this is a theme. Things will bundle and unbundle. And will oscillate between the two extremes, somewhat driven by, I think, the VC industry, although it's such a minor role, but they do ultimately inject money that starts these companies. And if there's money to be had, well, certainly there was a lot during COVID, and so we got a lot.
Well, I mean, the tell's really going to be Matt Turk's Mad Data Landscape and how much that's either grown or contracted when he releases it over the next couple of years. That's how I look at it. It's I mean, I always view the pendulum swing you said as sort of a feast or famine mode, where the feast is when there's money to be made, and the famine is when everybody's been killed off or cannibalized, and but then it starts anew, like it always does. Because when you're in famine mode, it's funny, especially lately, the government policies are to just carpet bomb the economy with endless cash and re-stimulate things, and then you're back to where you were. So, and if there's money raining from the sky, I would say you're an idiot not to try and get some of it for yourself. Don't have this purist notion like, well,
no,
I have to go earn every penny on my own. No,
you're only fooling yourself.
No, just get the money, get that money. Yeah, it's. I I'm curious to see what happens too, especially now that the Fed's going to start cutting rates.
Yeah, well, and the implications there too, right? There's been again, it's so varied out there where AI is just having this continuing party, and then others are really feeling it, somewhat perhaps quietly so, given all the AI knows.
It's interesting. I think that's changing too, though. Like I was talking to a founder the other day who was raising money for the startup, and this founder was saying that VCs are now saying, "Well, unless you have $1 million in the ARR, like, we're not even going to talk to you for a
Mm.
simple early stage round, maybe even seed. I think it was seed. But then this founder's like, well, given that I could start leveraging AI for a lot of the code building, and the infrastructure, and everything else, I can do a lot more with a lot less these days. And even if
Mm.
it's like, even if I still have to put in more work to fix the code, it's like I still don't need the engineering team I would have needed before this. So
Mm.
this whole question was, if I hit $1 million in ARR, like, okay, what do I need your money for?
Yep.
Right? It wasn't a flippant question. I think it's a very solid question because a lot of these VCs are asking, well, how big is your engineering team? And he's like, well, my engineering team right now is Clock.ai.
Yeah, does that really work?
I think it works pretty damn well, actually.
Mm. Yeah, well, okay then. Well, okay. Changing tracks a bit, actually, Joe. This is
The
a completely separate topic here.
polyatomic team, you're fine.
Yeah. We do use actually internally. I mean, I suppose like any sensible engineering team, of course, we use GitHub Copilot
Yeah.
to write a bunch of drudgery. But the bit, I mean, at our scale, what we're dealing with is scaling systems.
Yeah.
AI is very good at the self-contained task. Make me a design mock, make me a self-contained bit of code, but make me a system that scales. Given I have an existing code base and existing infra on AWS. Hopefully, we'll get there someday.
I think it's going to happen. I
Yeah,
really do.
true.
I know a lot of skeptics, and I talk to them about it. But I mean, if you look at there's too much money and too much attention on this, and I think the technology is actually pretty good. It will happen.
Anytime there's a load of smart people consistently working on something,
Yep.
pay attention. Yeah, that's a good
Yep.
rule.
And it might be one of these things where maybe the current approach doesn't work, but again, enough attention's on it where either new hardware or new algorithmic approaches will inevitably happen. Because again, I mean, when you understand that you're at a point where the possibility is that you could reinvent entire industries, and there's money to be invested into that, that people are going to invest the time to make that happen.
For sure, yeah. That's nice and optimistic. Can't wait for the future.
Oh, I can't wait. I mean, I'm not saying I'm optimistic.
Oh, it sounds optimistic to me.
But I mean, it is. I mean, it's a cool time to be alive for sure. I mean, it's you don't get. I mean, I think the only other time we had this was during the web, and I actually think this is actually far more fascinating than that time period.
Yeah, I guess we had the web, then we had smartphones.
That was a big one.
That was very big, and then now it's this, I suppose.
Yeah,
the third wave here, at least in my lifetime. Makes sense. Well, talking about the web here, Joe, this is a personal curiosity. You are going to be teaching a deep learning AI, and very briefly from me, what is that going to be about?
Well, Matt and I wrote a book on data engineering. That book, I think, got pretty popular. But what's really cool is there was an opportunity to. Got approached by a lot of companies that wanted to make courses based on the book, data engineering courses. I think data engineering is definitely seeing its ascendancy. I don't think that that's anywhere near complete yet. But I felt like I wasn't quite ready to pull the trigger to do a course. And then folks at Deep Learning came along, and at first I thought it was a prank, actually. So I was like, why would they be interested in this? Because it's Andrew Ng's company, right? If you know Andrew Ng,
yeah, of course.
Kind of like,
back when I was much younger, I took his machine learning course. The first ever online.
Yeah, same. I think maybe Matt did too. I mean, that was like the canonical course. I think that I think is one of the major factors for kicking off the data science revolution, for example.
Yep.
And then I think made machine learning very popular. But anyway, this course is going to be through them. It's a 16-week full data engineering professional certificate on Coursera. So cover everything that's in the book, the data engineering lifecycle, the undercurrents.
Yep.
But I think what this does is it accomplishes what the book couldn't do. What Matt and I didn't want to have a book that had a lot of technical examples, a lot of code, because when you do that in a book, that book goes stale really quick. So
Yep.
I'm a firm believer that code should not be in books. People can push back on me all day about this, but
I mean, it depends on the book, right? Like if the book's intention is to teach you a particular version of pandas, that's fine. But I think our industry actually has more need for books that last a long time. And both Joe and I had seen many data cycles even before we started writing this, right? Like you have Hadoop, the definitive guide. How many people are reading that now? You know, even you go read Spark, the definitive guide, previous editions. It's things change so much. We're not using RDDs, we're using data frames, and so wanted to kind of say, you know, what stays stable. But to Joe's point, you still need training in those details if you're actually going to do the job at some point.
Yep.
And I feel like courses are just an easier way to do that. I think like code examples. I mean, the thing for me was several years ago, I went to the thrift store or the library, I can't remember which, to donate like boxes of O'Reilly books and other code books. And I was like, this sucks. I mean, it's like the person who read this is going to get an outdated version of this material. I had to basically, these books took up a lot of space in my house.
Yeah, I've
right?
got bookshelves on my left there with all this crap. I just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm serious. I still have like a Java 5 book laying around.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, like that's useful for a paperweight. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think like nowadays, especially given the availability of, GitHub videos, especially, and so forth, I feel like teaching code should be more of a, and AI too, to be frank. I mean, I think that what you guys start seeing more is like personalization and tutorials, that are AI driven. But in a nutshell, I feel like that, to me personally, my opinion is, make a course out of it, because again, the content's more modular. If something needs to be updated, far easier to do just record that video versus like, oh, now I have to reprint this entire book. I think of like the environmental impact on that too. It's it's insane, and then all this shit just goes to the dump. So it's anyway. Soapbox. I'll step off it for a second. So the course is, I think, all the examples and the stuff that we wanted to teach in the book that we just didn't get a chance to write about on purpose, right? And so it's really the yin to the yang. Goes over a lot of hands-on examples. We partnered with AWS for the course, so like got a lot of great materials and input and help from the AWS team. There's it's really cool to see. Anyway, the course comes out next Wednesday, the 18th. So more on that pretty soon. I think you're gonna start seeing a lot of press around it in a bit. But like people like Morgan Willis from AWS and Navneet Shukla and several others are in the course. It's the real deal. I mean, I wanted to make the best data engineering course on the planet. And that's the only thing I told deep learning is like, if we can do that, then I'll be happy. So,
yeah, nice. Not too many of those. So yeah, cool. Looking forward to that one.
Thank you.
Well, on to questions, other questions. This is actually a question, and again, a very different topic, but a question I actually get regularly in my personal life, people coming to me for advice on this one. The data, and when I say data, I don't mean machine learning, rather the analytics side of data. The industry, I feel, sees a lot of churn. People really, at least within companies, certainly startups, which is what I'm most connected to, people leaving the data world to become engineers or product managers. They'll often sort of work on a data team. It'll be a startup. They'll join with wide eyes and enthusiasm, and then existential crisis comes up. Have you guys seen this phenomenon amongst some data people, where they just start wondering, well, what's my role here exactly? I certainly have opinions on this one.
Matt?
I mean, we've seen data people and software developers, frankly, go off and just go do woodworking for a year, right? Like just
there's if you take that as an extreme, maybe, but the data people I'm talking about are ones who remain within technology. They just switch their roles. I've never seen a software engineer, well, I suppose they can become a manager maybe, but they rarely tend to make such a drastic shift.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I have seen people do this, as a matter of fact, but I haven't like had a long conversation with them as to why they made this leap. I don't know. What about you, Joe?
I mean, it's a tough. Okay, let me pose a scenario to you. Say you're hired into a company, and the expectations of the general practice of what you do are misunderstood, not well known. You tend to operate in a silo in a lot of companies. Um, people uh, people don't understand. Yeah, I think there's a general misunderstanding of like what data people do, and so this is a common thing I talk to data people about, and whether it's individual practitioners or um, uh,
The
people
management.
who are managers or people who are executives even. Um, it seems like if you go up and down the most corporate hierarchies, data itself is, I think, something that is just not well understood, not well communicated. Of course, there are certainly exceptions. There are companies that utilize
Hmm.
data to its fullest extent, but I would say in a lot of cases, it's not. But then there's this thing that people, managers and executives feel like you got to have a data team. You got to be data driven. You have to, you know, data's the new oil. Now you got to do AI because if you don't do that, like you're going to be obsolete in the next, 5 minutes or something. Um, so if you can imagine you're hired into that sort of a situation, how do you feel?
Well, initially, you must feel like you're important and needed and so on, right? I've been told I'm
Yeah,
important, I'm needed, hence I'm being hired. And then, really, what you're pointing to is a mismatch between expectations and reality.
bingo.
The thing is, who is that dreaded word, but who is to blame for this, right? Is there just a general lack of education in the ether regarding or directed towards those hiring for these situations?
It's
Or
an
what?
interesting question. There was an old Wall Street Journal article from last year that talked about marketing. Right? How long has marketing been around?
Since God knows what, I mean, ancient Greece.
Yeah, I mean, some form of it, right? And marketing as a profession, advertising as a profession, I would say it's been around for a while. On my bookshelf over there, I have old books from David Ogilvy, for example, on
Mm.
advertising from the golden age of Mad Men. But so it was in Wall Street Journal last year. I think it was last year. Whatever, I'll find the article. But it explained the mismatch between these expectations of CEOs and chief marketing officers, CMOs. 70% of I'm going to paraphrase here. I'm probably butchering the numbers, but the spirit remains. Majority of CEOs felt like they understood marketing and the
Mm.
function that marketing provides. Um, Chief marketing officers, I think it was like 22% felt that their CEO actually understood what marketing was supposed to
Oh,
do
goodness.
or what the CMO was supposed to do.
It's the most fired position, at least the Silicon Valley perspective. The head of marketing is your most fired position.
Easily. Oh, and I think next the only other job that might have a shorter tenure is chief data officer.
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you responsible for if you're a chief data officer?
Um, that's a great question.
VP of marketing. Well, I sort of, even if I put myself in that position, I'd go, well, VP of marketing, you're bringing leads. I'm measuring you against this number, right? VP of sales, I'm measuring you against your number. VP of engineering, you're going to be delivering product every quarter, every month, whatever it is your team needs to ship.
Mhm.
Chief data officer, what do I expect out of them, right? In a way that sort of, I know whether you're fireable or hireable.
Yeah, that's exactly
What
it.
gets
I
a
don't
chief
think
data
there's.
officer fired, right? A head of sales misses their number, they get fired. Head of engineering doesn't deliver product, they get fired. Marketing doesn't deliver leads, they're fired. What
As far as I
causes?
can tell, it's if you don't deliver on initiatives, right? But what are those initiatives
Yeah.
based on?
Yep.
And then the thing is, when I talk to chief data officers, there's a question of, okay, so you come into a company, and again, this isn't the Silicon Valley company. These are traditional. These are the 95%
Yep.
of companies out there,
Yep. Coca-Cola's and
right?
so on.
Yeah, and you come into these companies. Okay, so great. I've been hired to do data stuff. Maybe some digital transformation, some data modernization, whatever that is, right? You talk to somebody like Sol Rashidi, you got like 6 months to basically get everybody on board, get your budget, and then you can start executing. The problem with this is um, data is usually owned by a lot of different departments.
Yep.
And since there's loss aversion, guess who's probably not going to be giving up their data to you anytime soon? or might not align with you on how this data is going to be used.
Mhm.
And so this is the central challenge. When I talk to CDOs, and a lot of the time just spent in alignment meetings, whatever that is, trying to corral stakeholders. And what I've learned in this situation is all these people need to do is just wait you out.
Meaning?
Well, say that I'm new at a company, and I have this initiative. You have your own stuff going on. Whether I succeed or not doesn't really impact you,
Well, of course, yeah, I'm
right?
busy. Basically, I'm
Yeah, and
busy.
you're just like, cool. All I need to do is just give you the minimal support as the CEO asked me to give you. I may even not do that,
Mhm.
and I know that you're basically here as sort of this newfangled thing that may or may not work. I just need to wait you out. That's all I need to do. I don't need to do shit. Like,
Unless the CEO tells me, "Hey, look."
that's where it comes down to. Is if it has to be the support from the top. Like, it's the CDO themselves. As far as I found it, it's often a toothless position.
Mm. And the top, so to speak, at least the person hiring this person, doesn't really maybe know even what they want them for, right? Otherwise, they would just tell everyone, "Hey, support them in these manners."
Yep.
And so, hence, existential crisis.
I mean, I think part of the problem with CDO is that you do have very different notions of what data is about, right? So you have the very traditional business analytics, data warehousing, collect a lot of data, make it consistent so we can build reporting. And then you had the whole like big data era, and then going further into machine learning, data science, and now generative AI. And often the CDO is the person who's supposed to chase hype cycles. Let's be honest. Like the CEO says, "Hey, we now." You even hear it from these like really old traditional companies like airlines. "Hey, we need a Gen AI strategy. What are we going to use Gen AI for? I don't know, but go make it happen," right? And the CDO is supposed to serve the traditional like core business functions, but also chase all these hype cycles
Yep.
and
Yep.
somehow make magic happen. And I don't know, I would not envy a CDO in that
Well,
position right
and as
now.
Val points out too, it's the same with chief AI officers. So that's what's happening. Is the role of CDO is just basically they're changing the title of chief AI officers, the trend right now, and um, yeah. So I mean, but it comes back to your earlier question about data and data people, right? So if this is the person at the top, hopefully if you're hired in as an individual contributor on a data team, that you have the cover to do the work that is going
Mhm.
to help move the needle. It's not like it's not like you sign up for a job saying that I really want to do a mediocre job and not make any impact whatsoever. I plan to spend the next few years doing exactly that. Like, I don't
Mm.
think anyone wants to do that.
Mhm.
That ends up being the reality, sadly, for people, and that sucks. At the same time, we've seen situations where people do have positive impacts with data, and I think when that happens, the situation is such that from the top down and the bottom up, it's clear what data is going to be used for, and the value that it provides. It's
Mm.
when data is being done for, I think, some sort of a circus sideshow or a novelty that
Vanity, probably.
vanity is a lot of it. Like, we have a data team, right? I remember WeWork would do this. WeWork would have a ton of PhDs on bench, data scientists. And why is this? They weren't doing anything, as far as I could tell. As far as I've heard, they were there because when WeWork needed to raise more money, they could say, "Well, we have AI initiatives. We're doing data science, and this is a team that's going to make it happen.
Mhm.
That is making it happen." Um, they bought a company I was at for that, so that's how I know
Yep.
we were a data team. Just like so, things like that also happen, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been hired as the data person just so people could point to me in the
Yep.
cage over there and say, we have a data person."
Yeah, it's one thing comes to mind, and maybe this will be the last thing since maybe we're running out of time. I'll let you steer, Joe. But there is, I think, a bit of an unspoken paradox too with data people. They don't own any of the data. They, in fact, come in and just don't understand it, right? And have to understand, they're not a salesperson, they're not a marketing person, they're not a finance person. So they don't really understand the data. They don't own it, and they don't own any decisions that affect the company. And I think that's many data people fall in this bucket, and it's a bit of an unspoken paradox, I think. How could you possibly be valued and do a job if you fit these criteria? Well, okay, here's to better communication then when it comes to hiring and better job descriptions.
let's pray for that. But I mean, if you listen to the prognosticators, everything's going to be run by robots anyway in the next 10 years, so it won't matter. I'm kidding. Maybe not, actually. It's interesting. I was reading Daniel Susskind's A World Without Work. I started reading that, so I'll let you know give you the book report on that when I'm done with it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's actually an optimistic read, despite the I think what you might guess are the underlying tones of it. But yeah, anyway, that's a side show for a different day. Well, thanks for being on again. I hope you're a recurring guest. You're sometimes just having chats like this is there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's fun, but there's a reason to actually. Yeah, do you have anything you want to give a shout out for or give a plug to?
If I'm giving a plug, I mean, certainly Polytomic, my company, we do ETL pipelines, and we do them in all directions. So you don't have to buy multiple products to move your data around. It's the one place to move any data anywhere, into warehouses, out of warehouses, everything else. That's the one plug I'll make, and I'll restrict myself to that one only.
Awesome. Good company, good guy, good team. Matt, anything you want to give a shout out for?
Let's see, the O'Reilly Superstream I'll be running on becoming a data engineer, which will be on October 16th, and I'll be posting more information about that soon. So
looks like you started posting guests.
Yeah, we have a great slate of guests. So I'm waiting for one more talk description, basically. But yeah, awesome. Andy Petrella is actually going to be keynoting it. So we're excited to have him, CEO of Kensu.
Nice.
Yeah.
He's
How about you,
kind
Joe?
Of old school data engineer.
He is. We're all old school here.
I guess it's true. What is it? This week on Thursday the 12th, I'm doing a panel at the MLOps community. I think it's data engineering for ML or AI or something like that. So I'll be on a panel with Chad Sanderson. Wait, no, I don't actually. I need to go back and look. I just totally butchered people I'm on a panel with. I'm on a lot of panels. I apologize to everybody. And then next week, I'm at Big Data London. Next Wednesday, the 18th, I'm going to keynote there and be on a panel and be actually on a bunch of panels. So just catch me there. I think it's the only day I'm going to be there. It's the 18th. Might show up in the morning of the 19th. Might be at the prior day, Tuesday, there's a data meetup. I might be at that in London. That's really vague. It's just catch me outside, I guess. And then on Monday, the 16th, I guess we have another guest showing up. That would be Andrew Ng. So we're going to talk about data engineering for data-centric AI.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, pretty good guest. So stoked on that. Andrew's been leading the charge on data-centric AI. And so this is definitely a treat to get to talk with him. And course comes out on the 18th, I guess, too. So that'll be dope. In the course, so you can
good stuff.
Watch that. And then after that, after London, flying to Australia, and I'll be on the Data Eng Bytes tour. So that's in Sydney, Perth, Melbourne, and Auckland, New Zealand. And then the week after that, on the 9th of October, I'll be at DBT's Coalesce.
Yep, so will I. Matt, will you be there?
Dope.
I don't have plans to be there right now, no.
Why don't you show up, do this in Vegas? You can just take a Greyhound or something.
Who wouldn't go to Vegas?
I'll look into it. Yeah. I went.
Take one of those gambling buses.
I went to their San Diego conference like a year ago. So yeah. That was fun. It's a small conference. It's kind of an interesting vibe. I'd be curious kind of to see how things have evolved over the last year and a half, honestly.
I bet they have, yeah. Bet they have. I mean, part of the reason I'm going is anthropological purposes too, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm very curious too. So that'd be a good one. I think the talks I give might be. We'll see how it goes. It'll be very jet lagged.
It'd be good to catch up with people, which is really the
point. Yeah. Hit me up, dude. Let's go grab a pint or 12. So yeah,
sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. All right. Are you giving a talk there, by the way? Or are you just hanging out?
Pardon?
Are you giving a talk there? Or are you hanging out?
I'm just hanging out. I'm actually just going to be there. Yeah, I think it's the Monday, Tuesday that I'm back on the Wednesday. So yeah, I'll be skipping most of Wednesday and Thursday, but I'll be there Sunday night till Wednesday afternoon.
Nice.
Yeah. We'll see you there then.
All right. Well, cool. Thanks to the audience for sticking around and listening to us rant and answer each other's questions and sometimes answering yours. And we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.